In terms of the documentary, though, there were a couple of revealing things, and I had no idea, and you guys have to help me out. Did the story of the Undertaker's brother come out in the news sites? I don't remember seeing that anywhere. Not on Fightful or Pro Wrestling Sheet or The Observer, anywhere else, unless I read it and forgot it. But I think if I would have read that and then saw it in the documentary, it would have triggered a memory. So that was one of the saddest things about that, because I believe he said he got the phone call. They were doing a walkthrough of the Boneyard match and heading back in the car. He said his niece was calling him. He's like, something told me to pick up the phone. And he picked up the phone, and she informed him that his brother had died, had a heart attack and died. And then I think the next day he had to film the Boneyard match. And he's like, it's crazy. You know, your brother just dies, and then you have to go do a match that's filled with caskets and burial and death. What he had to go through mentally to do that probably was so hard, because that was such a long match to film, looked grueling, took him many, many hours to get all those shots and do all that stuff. And he described even, and we've talked about this in the empty arena stuff and the cinematic stuff, you know, when there's no crowd there, you know, what that can do to your adrenaline. And also when you're filming long matches like this and you got 30 and 45-minute pauses in between bumps so they can switch camera shots and get everything set up, you know, you're just aches and pains. You stiffen back up. You're not loose. And it was probably an absolute nightmare to film, even though it came out great. But to have to go through that literally just a day or so after you found out your brother died, that just broke my heart for him. I had no idea. Didn't even know that was, that had happened to him. And I believe, now I feel bad because I don't remember. Was it Michelle McCool's brother or nephew? Died in a car accident, just graduated high school and died. And so she suffered. She went through a big loss too. So they both went through some shit there at the end. And, you know, that was really sad. But probably the most revealing thing about it, you know, they showed the build up. They showed the match that he had last year at Extreme Rules. And that's when he told Vince, you know, I think I'm done. And that surprised me. I always thought like Taker would have a last match, and that was kind of weird. He's like, I think I'm done and whatever, and we'll see how I feel. I got to go home and think and shit. And that's when they talked about how AJ Styles had called him. They have a connection. Apparently, Taker and AJ have a mutual friend. And AJ's like, look, if you want to come back, I'd love a chance to work with you. And Taker thought about it and finally agreed. Loved the story of the rib. That was great. When Taker's like, you know what, I'm going to do it. There's nobody better to work with in the company than AJ from, you know, a pro's perspective. He can trust AJ. AJ ain't going to drop him on his head. And the match is going to be safe and good. And so Taker decided to do it. Apparently, Taker told Vince to call AJ and said that there's some rookie out of Tennessee that Undertaker wants to put over at WrestleMania just to mess with him. And AJ, to his credit, didn't really buy it. You might think the earth is flat, but he's not dumb enough to believe that. He's like, bullshit, you're ribbing me. And sure enough, they were, and the match was on. But, you know, at that time, the COVID stuff had not happened or not gotten serious yet. So at that time, they were planning on doing an in-ring match. And they showed the build up to that in Saudi Arabia and everything. So by the time WrestleMania rolls around, it becomes clear that it's not going to happen at Raymond James Stadium. It's going to have to be moved indoors. And they have the Boneyard match idea, admittedly not knowing what a Boneyard match was when they made it. And they still made it work. They found some off-site place about 45-minute drive, I believe they said, away from the Performance Center. At the edge of a residential neighborhood, they found this like little graveyard. And the production team apparently completely gave this thing a huge facelift. And Taker's like, if you would have seen it the day before compared to what it looked like, it was like night and day. And they filmed the whole thing, and it came off as such a success. We all loved it. We spoke. We raved and raved about the Boneyard match during WrestleMania weekend right here on this channel and how great it was. And even though it was grueling, and maybe at the time during filming, he didn't know how good it was going to turn out until he saw the final product. That was kind of it for him. And Taker, you know, kind of closed out the documentary by saying he's content. You know, that was his final moment, is a good one. And I think that's been one of his biggest fears, is that him going out there and saying, okay, this is going to be my last match. That's an enormous amount of pressure, because if you're not satisfied with that last match, it's going to eat away at you and bug you, which is apparently what happened to the WrestleMania 33 match, which I would have been fine with. For his retirement, he wasn't fine with it and came back to work a bunch more. So, you know, on one hand, I understand that completely from, you know, nobody can put themselves in his shoes. I saw a really interesting take on the documentary on Twitter a couple of days ago that our buddy WrestleMania had posted. And it's not exactly all wrong. It's not entirely true, but it's not entirely false either. To where, you know, what are we watching here? You know, we're watching a multimillionaire. You know, when Michelle McCool gets mad and wags her finger at all the fans and says, you know, you don't know what he's gone through making some of these decisions. I'm like, what? A multimillionaire has to decide to take another $1 million match next year? Oh, it's so hard. Poor Mark. You know, I kind of understand that to a degree. You know, every time you come back, it's just, you know, you're just adding to your legacy more money and more money when you could hang it up whenever you wanted, good or bad match. The fans would love you forever. You know, so it seems like more of a personal struggle with him. If he went out there and had a stinker in his last match, I would never think any less of The Undertaker, but I think he would. And so I think that's why now he feels a little bit content, and he essentially, at the end of this thing here, announced his retirement. But while he's announcing the retirement, simultaneously in the same breath saying, you never know, if Vince is in an emergency, he can call on me, you know, in case of emergency, break open glass, and The Undertaker can be there to wrestle a match. So even as he said he was done, he still said he wasn't done. And so I don't know whether or not to take this at face value or not. And I think with Undertaker, he's probably saying he's done for now because the future is so uncertain. We don't know what wrestling is going to look like. We have no idea the progression of the coronavirus and how that's going to progress in the months and years to come. And I think he wants to say now that if I'm done, I can be satisfied because that match, yes, it wasn't in a ring. Yes, it wasn't in front of an arena full of people, but that's one that we're always going to remember, and it was a kick-ass match. And if that's got to be my last memory in a great match at WrestleMania against a pro like AJ Styles, I'm content with that. So that's good. I'm glad that he's content, but how do you go 29 years and you're 5 months away from your 30th anniversary, which will likely not only be at the same show, but fall on the exact same date? How do you not do something at Survivor Series? So maybe he never wrestles again. Maybe he has another fight, never has another fight again. But how can you not at least do an appearance at Survivor Series to commemorate the 30-year anniversary? And if all goes well and COVID is, you know, not going to wreak havoc on us again later on in the year, and WrestleMania goes on as planned in LA here next year, this is the Hall of Fame for him to go into. Is going to be this year. And I want to be there to see it in person. We had speculated that maybe since the Boneyard match was such a success and cinematic offsite matches are now an option, you essentially now could do something with Sting because you can edit it and hide it. You put him in the ring in front of 80,000 people, fans are going to poop themselves. So I think that that should not be out of the question, but maybe now it is. As long as The Undertaker's at peace, I'm fine with that. I'm still skeptical. I still, unfortunately, cannot take him at face value for his retirement. He already fooled me once. I thought that was it. He made me fucking cry at WrestleMania 33. I'd like to believe him, but I believed him when he took his hat and jacket and gloves off. So I say he said himself, never say never, and I think that's exactly what that means. So in the ring, do we ever see him again? I don't know. I think I'd at least like to see an appearance, you know, if we can get fans back in the arena, if we're back to somewhat of a normal life by the time we get to the fall and the holiday season and you can have a Survivor Series. I would love to see The Undertaker at least come down to the ring and be saluted. We mentioned, I forgot where I mentioned it, one of my recent streams, the wonderful send-off for Jushin Liger in Japan at the beginning of the year, and how awesome that like salute and that ceremony was for him, and the dead silence of the crowd and the respect that was paid. I'd like to see something like that for The Undertaker at Survivor Series. You know, the Hall of Fame can be saved for Mark. Mark can give us that speech directly from Mark Calloway's mouth. He can be himself, just like we've seen him in this documentary, and that we're starting to get to know him as. But maybe at Survivor Series, that can be the official send-off of the Dead Man. The Dead Man character, the final time you see the black hat, the coat, the gloves, and it can just be a symbolic thing. Everything he did at WrestleMania 33, do it at Survivor Series this year, just minus the match. Come out to the ring, take your shit off, put it down to close the show, and you fade to black. Survivor Series goes off the air. I'd be fine with that. And then at next year's WrestleMania, put him in the Hall of Fame. Either Kane or Vince does the induction. I don't care who. As long as it's one of them. And that's it. Shawn doing the induction. I'm not opposed to Shawn, but no, it's Kane. It's got to be Kane or Vince. Sean actually has a case, but I think Kane and Vince have a bigger case. Especially Vince. You know, I feel like Undertaker was unbelievably loyal back in the day, and Vince McMahon inducted Stone Cold Steve Austin for a couple of reasons. Number one, their rivalry, but also because Steve Austin saved the WWE, and Austin was that important to their success. And in a lot of ways, I think Undertaker is one of those only other guys. You know, Vince should have done Hogan, honestly, too. I think Vince should have done Hogan, Steve, and Taker. But instead, they brought in Sylvester Stallone to do Hogan, I think. But I think if Vince did Undertaker, that would be very appropriate. You know, that he's the one because, you know, he's stuck with him. He's had a big relationship with Vince. You know, they've had their ups and downs over the years, but he always stuck with him, and he always remained loyal. And who knows all the sacrifices he had to make financially to stick with Vince. There was probably a certain point in his career where he would have been offered double to go to WCW, and he didn't. You know, because he wouldn't be able to be the Undertaker over there. The entire presentation would be lost. The music, everything would be lost. He couldn't do that over there. Even if they tried to recreate it, it would suck. Every time WCW tried to recreate anything, it sucked. Google the Renegade and find out. So Undertaker probably was smart enough to know that and be like, yeah, I could cash in, but they're going to do shit with this character. I mean, they're going to murder me because I can't even be the Undertaker, and I'm just going to be Mean Mark again. No thanks. So he stuck with WWE for a couple of, you know, and that's, number one, it was smart for him to stay there. Even if it meant less money, it was going to be more for his legacy. So, you know, you hope that he realized and understood that even back then as well. But, you know, Vince owes him a lot. You know, I remember being a fanboy of WWE back when WCW was starting to gain an audience. Hogan and Savage made the jump. And I remember reading all these magazines, hundreds of them. I have right behind me on my shelf. You go back to the back of the PWI, and they list the rankings of WWE wrestlers and WCW wrestlers. And I would look at those rankings side by side, and I would match everybody up. And I would always find a way to make WWE win, even if I knew in my heart of hearts the roster was stronger on the other side. But there was always one guy, no matter what, that always got the win. In my mind, there was nobody that could beat The Undertaker. Nobody in WCW, even the Giant, when he was brought in such a monstrous way, and he looked so unbeatable. You know, if I had a little fantasy match in my head, Undertaker versus the Giant, it was the Undertaker every time. I was like, he's better than the Giant. He's much better than the Giant. And that turned out to be true, because when Big Show came into WWE, he was the Undertaker's bitch in 1999. So he wasn't even close to as dominant as what he portrayed on WCW. But Undertaker was always that one unbeatable man to where I'm like, you know what? WCW might have a few bigger names right now, but nobody over there can beat The Undertaker. Hogan can't. Taker beat him. Everybody over there, basically, who had jumped from WWE to WCW, had lost to The Undertaker. And to me, that was my logic. Okay, maybe they got the better roster, but they don't have The Undertaker. And that was just me fanboying out. Even though, if I was honest with myself, WCW probably had the better talent a couple of those times, but I'd always find a way to manipulate it in my direction. And The Undertaker would be a big part of that, you know, because for a while, too, you know, it was in 97 when Brett left. The Undertaker, or in 98 when Shawn left. I think that's what it was. It was in Steve's first run. I'm pretty sure that they only had one former champion in the company, the whole company. One guy, Undertaker. Shawn was gone. Brett was gone. Vader, Yoko was gone. Vader never had a run with the title. Nash was gone. Anybody else that had held that belt was gone, because it would have been Brett and Shawn for so long. And then prior to that, it was Diesel. So, yeah, it was like in 98 there. The Undertaker was the only guy that was a former world champion until Austin lost the belt. And then, you know, they had another one, and then Kane was champion, and then he lost the belt. And then he started building it a little bit more. But it was that short span there in 98. You had one guy. And that's scary. So, like I said, Undertaker was he was the backbone of that whole company. He really was. You know how you see those big, like, giant collages, you know, of every wrestler, of every musician, or some just big, like, oil painting of every single star and silhouettes of them. I think if you did one of wrestling of the entire WWE lifespan, you know, from the 1960s to present day, and you included every single star in there somewhere, I think The Undertaker should hover as a big cloud over everybody else. You know, like the SummerSlam 97 poster where he's standing there over Brett and you got the fog and everything. That's what I think, like, that's what I view Undertaker's presence as in WWE, as, you know, the one that overlooks the Godfather, so to speak. You know, that one just epic character that was best character in the history of the business. Best character in the history of the business. I mean, his entire career is just constantly changing, and he was able to evolve, stay fresh. He referenced that in the documentary. He said, he goes, in 99, I felt like I was getting stale, and I felt that way too. When the Ministry of Darkness stuff ended, I was there. I was in Charlotte when he lost the title to Austin the night after King of the Ring. And after that, it felt like the Ministry had already felt like it had stalled out because Vince was the higher power, and that whole thing sucked. And then by the time Taker wrapped up his business with Austin, he wasn't left with much to do, and he was screwing around with the Big Show and stuff. And I remember thinking that he was really stale myself at that time, and that's when he got hurt and had to take time off. So when he came back, that's when he showed up as the American Badass, and he had a good 3-year run there. We got to hear him cut a normal promo, and he talked about that, how he was like outside of those handcuffs, like he wasn't confined to that Undertaker character. Rest in peace. He could actually talk like a human being, and we got like over 3 years of that out of him, 3.5 years before he went back to the Dead Man character. But that was a nice little time in his career, and he was able to still go back to being that Dead Man character. So, you know, he's got just a legendary career, and as a wrestling fan, you know, he's so much, and that's the thing, he's had such a long career, there's no way all of you, most of you in here, maybe with the exception of a few, probably weren't born when he had his first match. You know, where I was a teenager, I was like in 7th grade or something. Whatever grade you're in when you're 13, going on 14. But, you know, that's a long time just to watch somebody. I've grown. I went through puberty with The Undertaker wrestling. I lost my virginity with The Undertaker wrestling. I got my first job with The Undertaker wrestling. I got my first promotion. I moved, relocated my life several times, including to the West Coast. I got married. I got divorced. I've lived a full life. I've gone on vacations. I've gone all over the place, and I've had met so many friends, and taken so many wild rides, and had so many great life experiences. And everything I've done has been while The Undertaker has been in the ring. And to me, that's very personal. You know, that's like, wow, I can't even imagine. There's never been a time in my life where The Undertaker hasn't been a part of wrestling, and he's still here. So, you know, to me, that's just a real personal thing for me as just a fan. You know, I'm always just I'm going to have the utmost respect for that guy, for his professionalism. The wrestling business was lucky to have him, and it's still lucky to have him. I love the footage of him at the Performance Center talking to those kids. He was in that room with Matt Riddle and Keith Lee and a lot of other, and Dominik Dijakovic and a lot of the other bigger guys in NXT, kind of giving him a little like tutoring session, which was cool. And seeing him there, you know, kind of giving back, and the fact that he can be approachable, you know, because I know I compare him to Andre, but Andre wasn't that way. You go up to Andre, he'd tell you to fuck off. Take her, shake your hand, sit down with you, say, yeah, what's on your mind, man? That's a good guy. I don't care what your political affiliations are. You know, he's a good guy. So, you know, to see him there being a mentor to people and talking and having respect for that part of the business, even though some of us have felt like he's hung on too long, to me, he's the Undertaker and do what he wants. Andre wrestled until he couldn't. Andre did the same thing. He literally wrestled till he died, or till he couldn't walk, one or the other. So, you know, Taker can do whatever he wants, but the fact that he respects the business so much, and he talked about how it's your job to have it while you have it, and then you pass it on to the next generation. And some people just take a longer time to pass it on than others, but at least he's, you know, you never heard of Hogan doing that. Did Hogan ever go to the power plant in WCW and talk to the talent there and give him a training session or tutor him or get in the ring and bounce around with him? Undertaker's in the ring at 56 years old, hitting the ropes, taking punches and selling for rookies. You know, when his body is probably pretty fragile at this point. Is that something you ever saw Hogan do? No. Never in a million years would Hogan have given a fuck about anybody else coming up through the business after him. Last thing on his mind. First thing on the Undertaker's mind. So that's why he's different. That's why I have more respect for him than other wrestlers. And whatever he decides, he decides. And if this is it, I appreciate him. Appreciate him a lot.